I want to begin by welcoming you and thanking you for taking time out of your busy day to spend a little bit of time with us at the Latino Leadership Institute today for what I believe is a very important and critical conversation for us to have today and for the days and weeks and months to come. And that is this conversation about continuing to work together to unlock Latino potential while at the same time navigating the uncertainty ahead. My name is Joelle Martinez, and I am President and CEO of the Latino Leadership Institute. And for over a decade now, the LLI has been focused on accomplishing our mission of unlocking Latino potential by helping Latinos across the country, across sectors and industries, advance in their career to close the leadership gap, helping our Latino-owned businesses to grow and scale so that we can build wealth in our community, and leveraging one of the most important things we have, which is our social capital, our networks, so that we can increase our power and influence in our organizations and our communities across the country. I felt really compelled today to really pull back the curtains and have an honest conversation with all of you, similar to the conversations we've been having internally at the Latino Leadership Institute for about the last year or so. And that is, how do we keep going and doing this really important work when we find ourselves at this crossroads that we're at right now, navigating political, social, and economic uncertainty, what feels like left and right. Today's presentation is really to be honest with you and transparent with you about how I see this moment that we are all in today. I want to be honest about the challenges I think that lie ahead, but I also want to share with you the opportunities and the optimism that I continue to hold. And this is really an opportunity for you all too, to ask me questions, to share your comments and your concerns as well. And so we're going to ask you throughout today's presentation to put your comments and questions in the chat. And our team here at the LLI will be scouring the chat throughout my presentation. And then at the end of my presentation, we will open it up to your questions and I will answer as many as possible. So I want to start by laying the context of today's conversation, and that is this conversation around uncertainty. And, 10 years ago when I started the LLI with the other co-founders and have been doing this work alongside an amazing staff, we always knew that unlocking Latino potential was going to be a challenging endeavor. We knew that not everyone shared our vision for the future, and we knew that coming into our own power, actually caused fear and concern in some when it brought us nothing but joy. But this moment is different. And that is my honest pitch to you today. I believe that together we sit at a really critical juncture in our history as a community. I have said for a long time that the actions we take and the decisions we make in this moment are going to have a ripple effect for generations to come. But what has made this moment so extraordinary for Latinos? It began when the United States Supreme Court took up a court case, and they wanted to reevaluate affirmative action. And unfortunately, this United States Supreme Court decided to repeal longstanding practices that really did help bring Latinos and other marginalized communities to the table, particularly in higher ed. And so some might be asking, well, how did a higher ed decision, court decision, impact the work of a Latino leadership organization like ours? Well, right after that court case took place, 11 attorney general throughout the United States began writing letters to our corporate partners and corporate America across the country. And what those letters said is beware that while this court case had a specific narrow focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion endeavors and affirmative action practices for higher ed organizations, that we are putting corporate America on notice because we find that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts as a whole themselves are discriminatory. And if you're running programming to support one group and not all groups, then you would find yourselves sitting in a space of being discriminatory yourself. And so what we saw almost instantly at a time when we were actually feeling a lot of momentum and seeing a lot of momentum in elevating Latinos and other groups into more senior level positions, opening up financing and equity, is a lot of corporate partners began to get concerned. And you saw headlines in the newspapers likely around that time that said DE&I is all but dead. And so that fear, that concern for a lot of organizations really did pull back support in the type of work we do. Almost at the same time that the DE&I efforts, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts across the country were beginning to scale back, that same Supreme Court case actually led to another court case called the Fearless Fund court case. And in that court case, a group that was working to invest in Black women-owned businesses found themselves in a legal battle as well. As an extension of that affirmative action court case, they were sued by the same people who were behind the affirmative action court case, because what they were saying is that by only investing in Black women, you are discriminating against other potential business owners. And so they just recently wrapped up that court case. And what happened is that Latino organizations, even before this court case, were receiving less than 1% of funding for their community organizations. And after the Fearless Fund court case, we began to see a lot of philanthropic partners then began to worry and do some risk mitigation. And at the heart of that risk mitigation was the very essence of the work that brings us together today, unlocking Latino potential. Really bridging the gaps that continue to persist in our community, something that has been at the core and the heart of our work at the Latino Leadership Institute since the very beginning. And so when we find ourselves at this critical juncture, when we are searching both for solutions and also hope, I always like to say that when you find the why, you're going to find your way. So I want to transition a little bit. If that is the context, if this uncertain times, including uncertainty around an election that'll take place in less than 1 week, uncertainty about the economic future, uncertainty about the legal ramifications that have already begun to kind of spiral and impact organizations, we have to know why it is so important to keep going in this work. And why, more than ever, the actions we take are going to determine outcomes, not just for us, but for future generations that will follow. So as I think about the why, this is probably what instills fear in many people and might be motivating them to attack the very work and essence of this organization and others like ours. But for people like me, this motivates me and excites me. You see, because in 1950, when the United States was trying to reconcile before the start of the civil rights movement, as we were beginning to really figure out what type of nation we were going to be, where our North Star and our values actually lied, the Latino population was only about 3% at that time. So we really weren't, the significant factor that we are today. But if you fast forward to our presence today, and we know that nearly 20% of America today is identifying as Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, or some version of that. But what really keeps me motivated in this work and tells me why we can't relent in this moment of challenge is because as we fast forward into the future, just right on the horizon in 2050, nearly 1 in 3 Americans will identify as Latino. This is why I call this the Latino century. You see, there is no putting a cap on the demographic shifts that have taken place. Latinos are going to define and redefine America for the foreseeable future. So we have to continue to do this work because the future of America is Latino. But we are not just a demographic superpower. This is not just about the sheer volume and number of Latinos that will occupy and lead in America for centuries to come. This is the fact that Latinos are actually a dynamic force that are fueling all factors of life today. And if we fail to unlock that Latino potential and really captivate and capitalize on this force, then it's not just the Latino community that can find themselves vulnerable. It is the economy as a whole. Let me explain what I mean by that. You've probably heard of the Latino GDP. And many years ago, good friends of mine began to capture the sheer economic value that Latinos had. In large part, their motivation is probably similar to motivation of us being on today's chat to begin with. And that is, we knew that the narrative that we were hearing, that Latinos are not contributors, that Latinos are taking away from our economy, that we are harming the fabric of America, that these narratives were really persistent 10 years ago, and we all know how that's been amplified today. So they decided to go and calculate what the Latino economic contributions were in America. And when they started calculating the Latino GDP, which is just like any GDP, it is the amount of money we're putting into the economy, how the economy is growing, what the size of that economy is. At that time, nearly 10 years ago, we were hovering at about 1.7 trillion in GDP. And that was an extraordinarily big number, something that we went across the country talking about. Well, those same folks just released the most current Latino GDP. And that GDP in less than 10 years has grown to $3.7 trillion. And there are some of you sitting on today's call that may be wondering, well, really, how big and how significant is even $3.7 trillion? Why is that a motivating factor for unlocking Latino potential, even in these uncertain times? Well, it turns out that if the US Latino community were an independent country, that we would boast the 5th largest GDP in the world. I mean, we're trailing only behind the United States, China, and Japan. And it turns out that we are the 3rd fastest growing economy, at least over the last decade. And that's true. We were only falling behind China and India at the rate and the pace of which we were growing. And what's really extraordinary that we found in this last GDP report is that actually since 2020 and the start of the pandemic, that the US Latino GDP is now the fastest growing economy in the entire world. Let that sink in for a minute. That's definitely not the messages that we're hearing out there about the contributions that Latinos have to this country. Our economic contributions are so significant that today, salsa, not ketchup, is America's #1 selling condiment. And things like tortillas outsell both hot dog and hamburger buns combined. And we know that our beloved tortilla chips are outselling potato chips today. Latinos are not just consumers, we are consumers of the future. Let me put this as simply as possible. Any narrative that out there that is contrary to this is just false facts. Latinos in America today are fueling our economy. They are the consumers of today and tomorrow, and this market share is only going to continue to grow. We have economic power. But at the same time, we are celebrating that economic power. In 2022, Latinos registered the largest wealth gap in history. In fact, the Latino wealth gap is nearly $1 million. So every time this Latino GDP report comes out and I see the extraordinary economic superpower that we are, it makes me think. It's like celebrating a thriving stock market while we ourselves are living paycheck to paycheck. In this moment, we have to be more than economic fuel. We have to begin to build wealth and circulate that wealth within our own community. We have to be both the economic superpower that we are, and we as individuals and as a community must close the wealth gap. But during these uncertain times, when the very work to close the wealth gap is under a microscope and in harm's way, it requires all of us to dig deeper and lean into this work more than ever before. And that's just on the economic front. If we also look at the workforce front, I am so tired and exhausted and have grown impatient with people that don't really know the facts about the Latino backbone of our economy and our workforce. In fact, it may surprise you to learn that just in the last 5 years alone, that the Latino community, the Latino workforce, this Latino cohort is responsible for 78% of all net new workers entering the workforce today. In fact, in the coming decades, we're about 30 million, 29-ish million in the workforce today. In the coming decades, we're going to double. We are going to double our percentage and our numbers in America's workforce. When I talk about the Latino century that is upon us, I talk about a workforce of tomorrow that is going to be more and more Latino. What's equally important, though, when I talk about this workforce participation, when I talk about the fact that American jobs are Latino jobs across every sector and industry, I must also talk about this workforce paradox that we continue to face. And that is, we could be ubiquitous, meaning that we are literally working in every job imaginable today, but yet we remain highly invisible, particularly in management, senior level, and definitely executive positions. In fact, Latino cohort represents the largest leadership opportunity career advancement gap of any working cohort in America today at 450%. What is a 450% Latino leadership gap all about? I think the best way to do this is put it in context of both time and representation. And it may surprise many of you on today's call to know that in 1990, we actually had closer parity in representation than we do today. Because you see, at the time, our population was just under 10%, but our executive leadership, our roles in senior management were actually hovering between 3 and 4% at that time. But if you fast forward to today in 2020, where we sit at this 450% gap, our population has increased, our workforce representation has increased, but we've barely moved the needle 1% on our representation in senior leadership, executive leadership, and management positions across all sectors and industries. Now, what's most alarming and why this inflection point and this moment of uncertainty and vulnerability is so important for us to continue to proceed in this work is because if we relent, if we don't join together to unlock Latino potential and to solve for the opportunity and leadership gap that exists in America's workforce today for Latinos, this gap is going to grow to 600% in the coming decades. And this just isn't a workforce pipeline challenge. This is an economic challenge for us. Because see, this means that fewer Latinos have positions that have benefits, retirement accounts, savings programs, healthcare, which all make for a stronger, more vibrant, holistic economy. So this is an imperative for all of us to continue to work and close. And it's interesting because when we started this work, people would ask me all the time, why? Why do we have this persistent leadership gap? Why have opportunities for Latinos across every sector and industry not kept pace with the talent, the dedication, the sheer effort that we are putting in, the fact that we've closed the education gap in so many ways and really worked towards that? Why is it that this leadership gap persists today? And what are the keys to unlocking this leadership gap and closing these opportunities? And, you know, it's something my grandfather said before I even started this organization. He said it wouldn't be enough for us to convince companies that we belong at the table. If we ourselves as Latinos did not see our own value, have our own confidence, have the social network and capital around us to continue to support us in our journey. It had to be a yes and. We have to tell companies why it's important we sit in those positions of power and influence. And we have to be ready and convinced ourselves that we belong in those positions. So the work of the LLI has really been to help understand that. How do we unlock this Latino potential and change the outcomes in career advancement? And the first and most important lesson, another part of a challenge, but yet an opportunity, is as Latinos and as allies of the Latino community, we must expand our understanding of this notion of the Latino experience. Far too many individuals and organizations continue to treat the Latino community, falsely so, as a monolith. I mean, we know we are a pan-ethnic, very diverse, culturally, language, geographically, nativity. We have so much beauty in the differences that exist within our community. I like to think of the Latino community more like a mosaic. We have these individual pieces that when coming together really have a vibrant tapestry. But many organizations and even many Latinos have a very narrow definition of what it means to be Latino. And if you don't fit those definitions, you're either on the outside as being not Latino enough or too Latino, or they just try to lump us all together. So one of the first steps that we have to navigate in this moment and really ask ourselves as a gut check is, are we willing to expand this Latino experience, to be more inclusive of all of the different varieties of Latinos that exist today? My good friend David Hayes Bautista always said this: if there's 30 million Latinos out there, there's 30 million ways of being Latino. And the moment that we really embrace that and open it up, we're going to be able to navigate this time of uncertainty together more holistically, stronger as a community. And so the second piece of that is, once we agree that we've got to address those limitations and how we've thought about Latinidad in the past, then we also, listen, we have locus of control here. We can decide to honor, to celebrate, and to embrace our identities, our culture, our authenticity. I mean, for so many of us, we have spent most of our career really navigating a space where we are told that if we don't assimilate, we won't succeed. Or put another way, to succeed, you must assimilate. You've got to change pieces of who you are. I'm sorry. I think in the Latino century, our Latinidad, our culture, our celebration of our authenticity and our identity are part of our superpower. But we have to decide in this moment, are we going to lean in on that and push back on, kind of this corporate culture or this organizational culture where we actually fear being who we are? And listen, in this political environment and in this social environment, it may be even more challenging to come out strongly in our Latinidad, but I believe this is key in this time of uncertainty to really own and celebrate it. I also want to acknowledge that I really do have concerns for our community as a whole. And this quote always comes up, and Norwood was the first African-American Black pilot of United Airlines. And he told his colleagues that, his success was because he was taught that you just work twice as hard to get half as far. And recently, on the attacks of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I heard a quote from Dr. Phil, of all people, not that we would use him as an expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but he said, the American values, it's about hard work, it's about work ethic, it's about talent and skill. There's no such thing as an equal or equity at the end of the line. There's no giving people success. People just have to earn it. What Dr. Phil and so many people today have no clue about is that for many of us, perfection is our baseline. Working twice as hard to get half as far is just quite simply the way and the journey that we have to follow. And so part of this time of uncertainty is raising our voices, lending our own experiences, being vulnerable, which I try to do as often as possible, to be honest about the fact that I fall into this bucket more times than not, where I am working, trying, doing more. The expectations as a Latina CEO that they place, sometimes I put them on myself, sometimes they put them on me, but I'm not making it half as far as some of my, allies and even competitors. And so what worries me in this moment is if we're not working together, if we're not sharing this load in this time of uncertainty, that the fact that Latinos face so much burnout, the fact that we are under these pressures, in addition to the stress and anxiety going around us, that more and more and more of us are going to face this burnout. And that is something that is something I think that is really important in this moment of uncertainty. At the end of the day, when I think of closing the leadership gap, I also believe in this holistically. My own success, my own life has proven this, that it wasn't just hard work. It was connections that change outcomes and close that leadership gap. When I went across the country in the early years of the LLI, and I asked CEOs when we were talking about the less than half of 1% of Latinas that were on corporate boards at the time, why they didn't recruit or how they recruited, every single one of me told me that they recruited their board based on who they know, their peer groups, who they went to college with, their Harvard buddies, their country club buddies. They sat on their board, so they asked them to sit on their board. So social capital and connections is just, if not more important than work. And that's what the folks like Dr. Phil don't understand, is that it's bigger than that. It's not hard work alone. And yet only 5% of Latinos out there today actually have a sponsor, have someone that I've had in my career saying, you know who you need at this table, you know who would do great at this. And that is part of the equation of why that leadership gap has not closed, despite the fact that we've closed the skills and the education gap. And so why do I stay hopeful and optimistic in this time of uncertainty around closing the leadership gap? And first and foremost, it's because we've built programs that are designed specifically to address those types of issues that are well below the surface, but at the core of what we have to do to overcome our leadership gap. I also believe in networks. I believe in the power that we have within this community. And I believe we built a community powerful enough to push back on the pullback on diversity, equity, and inclusion investments. And I believe at the end of the day, that in us supporting and working together, that'll ultimately close that leadership gap and lead to advancement for Latinos in every sector and industry. The second piece of work at the LLI is about building wealth, and building wealth through small business ownership, something that in my own family, coming from a family of entrepreneurs, is really personal and something I think we should all be involved in. And despite the fact that Latino businesses are opening at extraordinary rates, it is still true today that Latinos have the largest business ownership gap of any cohort in the United States today. So we have to do an even better job of motivating and inspiring Latinos to start and own their own business. But we can't just stop at starting a business, because that's not good enough, and that's not where we're going to build wealth. You see, 95% of Latino-owned businesses today are sole proprietors. They don't have any employees at all. And this is an important factor because we know that small businesses with employees that grow are not just building their independent wealth, but they're building a new class of employees that are predominantly Latino that also have good paying jobs, advancement opportunities within the organization. So we began to see the ripple effect of good, strong Latino-owned businesses. But it may surprise you to find out that less than 3% of all Latino-owned businesses across the United States ever make it past $1 million in annual revenue. Now, this is an important benchmark because if we really want to grow wealth in the Latino community, there are 3 ways you grow wealth. You grow wealth through home ownership, through investments, meaning that your money is working for you, and small business ownership. And I can't really control the housing market, or I can't get you to save and invest that money until you have money to invest. So where the LLI has really positioned itself over the years is helping Latino-owned businesses make it past that $1 million in annual recurring revenue. Because we know the moment we can do that, we can help them grow and scale even more. And that's where we're going to be able to gain that wealth gap closure. So how do we do this? How do we do this on the entrepreneur side? Very similar to our work in leadership. We are putting together programming. We are building a Latino CEO peer-to-peer network surrounded by subject matter experts and advisors. And we are helping our Latino businesses get past that $1 million mark. It has been extraordinary. Our LEAP entrepreneurs just in the last 2 years have added $9 million in net new revenue to their businesses. People tell me all the time, it can't be done. It's too hard. It's too monumental. There's too many challenges. The world is telling us that they may not want us to be contributors. They're determining what our value is in society. And I gotta tell you, regardless of what happens next Tuesday, regardless of how often they want to push back on efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I remain more hopeful and optimistic today than I have ever been, because I have seen the power of this Latino community. I have witnessed firsthand how you have continued to support and lift one another. But this is not our moment to be quiet. This is not our moment to accept the value that they're giving us. This is our moment to know our worth and accept nothing less. And so how do I know in navigating this uncertain times that there is opportunity ahead, that we can close these opportunity gaps and realize the full potential that the Latino community has to offer? And I think part of the strategy is about what we wanted to start today, and that's just connections. I think it's so important we just talk to one another. We share insights. We support one another. We listen and learn and lean in with one another. We collaborate with one another. We are so much stronger when we work together. And for a long time, the Latino community has been siloed. It has not always rallied around one another. But I believe that if we are going to navigate these uncertain times and come out the other end stronger, better, more powerful, and wealthier than ever before, it's going to come down to us being connected and working together. And so I really want to say that this is just not a feel-good moment. This is about building money and energy into the economy, because closing these leadership, business, and social capital gaps is a significant change in the overall economy of the United States. And so I close with this before we get to Q&A. If there is anything that has ever motivated me in my life and my career that I hold true, and my entire team will tell you this, is I fundamentally believe that destiny is not a matter of chance. We cannot sit back and just wait for things to right themselves. We cannot just sit back and wait for that leadership gap to close, or the business gap to close, or the networking gap to close, or the wealth gap to close. This thing about destiny, this thing about our future, this thing about everything that we want is a matter of choice. And the choices we make to lean into this work, to invest in this work, to partner in this work is what is going to lead to the outcomes of tomorrow. And the LLI has big plans. We are not just going to stop with our programming, because I believe so much in connections. We are now investing in leveraging and building technology so that we can help leverage this technology for the foreseeable future. Because we can circulate wealth, we can circulate power, we can circulate opportunity within our own community. And then what happens outside and some of these other pressures, politically, socially, and economically, have a little less power over our futures. We own our own destiny. So navigating uncertainty with all of the challenges, the solution is we take control. We work together. And we lead in this moment to ensure that not just ourselves, but our kids and their kids have a better future ahead. So with that, I want to thank you again for your time. And I see that we have chats, and I know we have chats and questions. And so I'll turn it over to my colleague, Michelle, and see what questions are out there and comments.
Okay. The first one is from Lena, and it's, can you speak about the Ignite journey and what would be the expectations for participants?
Yes. So Ignite, thank you for asking that. So when we talk about closing that leadership and professional development gap, Ignite is the program that we currently have out there today. Ignite is a virtual facilitator-led program. It is 6 90-minute modules, because we know we are all busy and we have to be very efficient and effective with our time. But at the core of the curriculum, when developing this curriculum, it goes back to some of the examples that I gave in my presentation, is that people don't come to us because they need skills. They need to be a better marketer, or they need to be a better salesperson. What I know from my own career journey and leadership journey is half the battle is just convincing myself that I am capable of doing it, building networks around my capabilities, and leveraging something we call neuro leadership, which has been foundational in all the work. And that is, how do we use what we know about the brain in order to become more productive, more collaborative, more agile? And so we built Ignite to really satisfy those issues. We address things like identity in the workplace and how we really began to build and push back on that assimilation that has kind of been forced upon us. How do we actually bring our full selves? What are some of the strategies and tools? And then we go there. Our second module is overcoming barriers. How do we, overcome our fear of success? We have a fear of success. There's sometimes mental models out there that, we think we feel failure, but really we don't know what to do with success. So we give some neuroscientific tools on how to really change the way we think about success. And we also talk about imposterization. I am not an imposter. I know this imposter syndrome is an important word and a real thing that's out there, but I'd rather have conversations about what causes me to think that I have to work twice as hard. What causes me to think that my baseline is perfection and I have no room for failure? And so we really work through some of those scenarios and look at how culture and also workplace environments, kind of create that imposterization and what to do around it. And then the rest of the modules are all about neuro leadership and neuroscience. How do we become more productive leaders? How do we really leverage connections in order to get ahead? And ultimately, how do we make a game plan for really outlining goals to achieve them for ourselves and our career in order to close these gaps? And what I can report to you, thank you on the question on Ignite, is that 96% of our alumni going through our program report career advancement within a year of going through the program. So we know the program works. And we have public engagements up on our website you can register for. And as soon as they close and hit capacity, they're closed. So they are first come, first serve. Thanks for the question.
Okay, Giovanni writes, he would love to hear your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities, what we believe the challenges and opportunities to further accelerate the goal of increasing Latino leaders is.
Yeah, I address some of them. Listen, I think one is the environment of which we're trying to navigate this. I've been around a long time. I had a political career before, coming into this, and a consulting career. And this is a unique time. I think that our community is under attack. It is being labeled as something it's not, which is, diminishing, I think, an external value that's placed. And so we have to do extra work, that feels really frustrating, if I'm being honest, to go out there and really explain again what our value, what our contributions, and what our worth are. But that is a challenge that we have in closing that gap, because they're hearing a different narrative about who we are and what we bring to the table. And so we've got to be even more forceful with our narrative about all the value that we bring. I think that for a long time, the Latino community, that gap hasn't really closed because we haven't really been a focal point of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Diversity, equity, and inclusion for the history, dating back to the civil rights movement and where a lot of the language and strategies came from, have always been really in a binary approach, meaning that it was dealing with race, white, Black race only, and then it was dealing with gender, men and women. And then really we kind of fast forwarded to, then beginning to really address, identity, sexual orientation, and some other things. And the Latino experience was really left out of that. So I think that we are just now entering into a very specific phase of closing that gap. So we're very early on in the process. And that is why it's even more important that we push back on both the negative narrative of Latinos, the pullback on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need that commitment now more than ever. And we have to realize that we're probably on the ground level of this and not quite reaching that penthouse yet, because I think we're just now getting the focus played on us. And so I think those really are rooted in some of these challenges that we continue to see and face.
We've got a question about Cumbre.
I love Cumbre.
Yeah, so what type of leaders or professionals does Cumbre Connect aim to attract? Are there specific industries, experience levels, or backgrounds that the program focuses on?
Yeah, so Cumbre is not a program. Cumbre
Right.
is an ecosystem and not yet developed. So you're the first hearing about it, but we're really excited about it. And quite frankly, Cumbre Connect really came out of just how fast and rapid the Latino Leadership Institute work and network has grown. We started here in Colorado 10 years ago, and a couple years ago, we made a strategic move to open up our programming and our network nationwide. And now we're in 35 states and I think 7 countries with our network members. And it just got too much. The people power behind the connections and the continued support. We just, we don't have enough human power, people power to do and satisfy all of that. So about 2 years ago, we decided it's time to leverage AI and technology to grow and scale and build an ecosystem. How do we set up a network where people can connect with one another? How do we set up a network where people can search for job opportunities and leadership opportunities? How do we set up a business ecosystem where Latino founders can be in contact with other Latino founders and subject matter experts, and ultimately even be connected to investors? So we started that design work earlier this year. We are still in the design. Our hope is that we can bring that to market next year. I will be honest, we are still fundraising for that, and being a Latina CEO trying to raise money is not easy. And that's another story for a different conversation. But we believe in the power of this community. We believe in social capital and connections. And so Cumbre Connect will be the next offering in addition to our programming and everything we do today. And hopefully that'll come online next year. But I thought it was really important to share the vision, because regardless of what happens a week from now, regardless of what happens a month from now, I still believe the source of change and the source of power lies within our community. And if we can break down silos, connect, support, uplift, and really solve some of these barriers, then it won't matter who's in a certain house, because we're just building the house we want. Michelle? Or Graciela?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Mike did not want to turn on. We're going back to DEI. How can I align my DEI goals with the overall business strategy to gain buy-in from executives?
Okay, this also could be a webinar in and of itself. So at the very beginning, when I started working with chief D&I officers as part of this work, it was always my belief that, and I would tell them honestly and to their face, you're not set up for success. And, these were chief D&I officers from big brand names, big corporations, and they would be, somewhat surprised that I'm telling them that they're not set up for success. And here's the reason, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is often performative, it is often reactionary, and very rarely tied to the P&Ls and the strategies of an organization. It's treated as a social endeavor. A lot of times DE&I is even connected to community instead of really connected to the financials and the growth and what that could look like. And so it's treated as a nice to have and not a must have for organization. And this is true, not every organization, but I would say 98% of the ones that I've encountered, this is how they've treated diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then in moments after George Floyd, and we have these, whether they're an internal moment, like a sexual harassment court case, or, these really, just life-altering moments like we saw in 2020, then DE&I gets, amplified, and it gets spotlighted, and maybe even gets infused a little bit more cash. But at the end of the day, if we want diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies to work, if we want them to be invested in, then aligning it with business strategies means the following. Number one, you've got to tie it to measurable goals. And this is really hard because a lot of people are satisfied with diversity if we just looked at the numbers, and most companies have decent diversity numbers. That may surprise you, but their diversity is in entry-level positions or lower skilled positions. And so drawing actual measurable results for how we are actually promoting and retaining is really important. And why does that matter for the company and the organization? Because we know how costly it is to recruit and replace employees. So it's a cost-saving measure. How do we combine that growth, that career growth, that leadership gap closing, along with cost-saving measures? Additionally, I don't need to tell anyone on this call, because I know y'all know that the more diversity you have, especially in leadership positions, the more innovative you're going to be, the more likely you are actually going to penetrate this second largest, fastest growing market in the United States and fastest growing economy in the world. And so representation in those decision makings just makes for better business. But if your company or your organization aren't tying the bottom line, sales growth, and market penetration, along with cost savings in HR and recruitment, to the work that you do, then there's a misalignment. And I think so many of those are misaligned that today, that's why nearly 40 or 50% of the chief diversity officers I was working with just 6 months ago don't sit in those positions today.
And I think we have time for one more question. And you've kind of answered this a little bit, but we'll see if you can expand on that. What steps can organizations take to identify, develop, and promote Latino talent within their ranks?
Okay, say that one more time, Michelle, just so I make sure I capture it all.
Yep. What steps can organizations take to identify, develop, and promote Latino talent within their ranks?
Yeah, this is so great. And every organization is different. So I always am a little reluctant to prescribe something that may not work with anyone. But the first is, you got to be connected to them. It's amazing as I work with a lot of organizations, especially if they don't have an employee resource group or some way for the Latino employees to be involved and be seen. It's really hard to know that they're even there. And, a lot of us don't have, maybe we don't even have a Latino Hispanic last name. And so I think the number one thing is you've got to know who they are, what they're doing, what their interests are. And a great way of doing that is by having some sort of network or employee resource strategy that allows you to be connected with your Latino employee base. The second piece of this that's really important is that you can have all that, but if you don't have belonging and Latinos don't feel like they're actually seen and that they belong in the organization, then data shows that they're less likely to lean in. They're less likely to even pursue career advancement and promotion opportunities. So we really want to make sure that we are, creating these resource groups or these networks, that we're also making sure that there's a sense of belonging. I think the third thing is you've got to address the gap within the gap. You may have read recently that Latinas are outpacing Latinos in getting their degrees. Latinas are now a majority of your wage earners and are making the financial decisions for their families, but they're also the ones that are in their careers and are growing in their workforce participation rates. But yet Latinas face the largest wealth gap of any cohort. We face gaps in promotion. We face nearly invisible representation in especially executive leadership roles. And so if we're really going to move the needle on that, then we have to address the gap within the gap. 86% of Latinas report not just facing, gender discrimination, but racial discrimination. And so we've got to have programming and strategies specific to Latina advancement. And one just kind of simple, but not simple to execute example of that is why Latinas will not take promotions, even if they are the most qualified for. May surprise some of you to know that Latinas 40% reported that they would not take a promotion if it meant that they would have less time to fulfill their obligations with their family. And so, or if they had to move out of state. And so people think that it's the job description, or it's a lack of talent, or a lack of ambition that stops us from putting ourselves on the pathway to elevated roles. But really, it's these other kind of factors, cultural norms, value alignment that come into place. And so you got to dig deeper. You got to build a real network. You got to create belonging. You've got to know the Latino experience in order to create solutions for the challenges that they're facing. And I go back to what I said, that they treat us kind of as this monolith. They make a lot of false assumptions. Half the time, they don't even know what term to use, or they determine the term to use. And so really getting to know your Latino employee base first, understanding their problems and concerns and challenges, and then building the solutions, and not the other way around. Looks like we might have time for one more, Michelle, maybe.
One more? Okay. Yeah. Let's look and see in here. We've got a lot of thank yous. I'm glad that they joined. Yes, the recording will be available. And I think the last one we have is, are there plans to offer some in-person cohorts?
Yeah, we get asked this along. And if you've known LLI for a long time, you know that that's actually our model that we started with, is doing in-person learning. I never say never, because that's never a good way of operating. And I think we're always open for new and changing things. But at least in the next 6 months or so, we're really going to be focused on creating the infrastructure and the technology. Again, we just continue to grow so much and so fast that we really want to make sure that we're here for the long haul to continue to support. I think internally we have talked about that the importance of in-person connections and in-person learning. We all, have gained from that ourselves. And so I wouldn't say never, but at least in the very near future, we're going to be focused in on delivering Ignite virtually. We are going to be opening up our entrepreneurship programming to more people, and really diversifying the type of programming that we're doing to support our Latino small business owners, and ultimately having the technology to help us make those connections more meaningful. And then we can come back to the drawing board and really determine what's next. And does that include some in-person? Potentially.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, I love when we can stay on time and continue. I know that Graciela and others have been putting some of that in the conversation today. I do want to close by saying that I know that there are going to be questions and concerns or thoughts, suggestions. I mean, maybe you have the solution of kind of navigating some of this uncertainty or ideas. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out to us. Joelle Martinez on our team can take your emails, your calls, and set up meetings with you, particularly if you want to talk about things like Ignite, like partnership with us in closing this leadership gap. She can talk to you about how we work with companies to really make sure that they are unlocking Latino potential. If you're on today's call and you're interested in learning more about our entrepreneurship work, how we're building wealth, what we're going to be offering in entrepreneurship, and how you can get involved and support this work to build Latino businesses past 1 million, then Harry Hollins on our team would be the person that you can connect with. And you can email them directly to request a meeting. Always our website, www.latinoslead.org, is available with lots of resources. But I just want to thank you for your time. I want to reaffirm that now more than ever, we have to lean into this work, collaborate, support one another. The Latino Leadership Institute is here regardless of the uncertainty we face, but maybe because of it. And I really appreciate you and know that we can only bring our vision to life with your support, with your contributions, with your partnership, introduce us to new partners, new companies, new friends that can help us really fulfill this vision. So thank you very much, and be on the lookout, because we are going to have some additional conversations in the near future. I wish you all well. Take care of yourselves. If we don't take care of ourselves, we're not good to anyone else, and we'll be in touch very soon.